Hi, my name is Rachael Green. I work within Flight Centre Marketing, and I was fortunate to be invited along on a G Adventures South Africa tour recently, and I'd love to take the opportunity to share my experiences with you. I think the first thing that's really worth noting is that South Africa has always been somewhere that I'd been dreaming of going, and I thought, put it off until one day. So I felt very, very lucky to be given the opportunity to go over with G Adventures and experience that now. The trip started in Johannesburg. I don't believe it's usually part of the typical tour itinerary, but for those interested in Johannesburg or wanting to start their South Africa trip somewhere, it is quite an eye-opening destination. It's a really interesting place, learning about the apartheid and whatnot, and a trip to the Apartheid Museum is well worth it. G Adventures were amazing in terms of connecting us with a local tour guide who did take us around the city, including to the Apartheid Museum and then to some of the informal settlements, including Soweto, which is quite an eye-opening experience, but I think it's really worthwhile. After our day in Johannesburg, we moved on to our road trip actually out to Kruger National Park. So we spent a day in the car. It was quite a long journey, but it was split up with some really amazing stops along the way, quite scenic lookouts, the most notable being the Three Rondavels, which is an outlook where you go and you see mountains with rounded tops. They call them the Three Rondavels because they look like, the Rondavel houses. So even though it was quite a long drive to get out to near where Kruger National Park was, it was broken up really, really well. And G Adventures did an amazing job of providing us with local history on the way, making sure that we were engaged and that we were having regular stops. So it actually didn't feel like it was, that long of a day, but it did take quite a while to get to our destination. We had our first full day safari in Kruger National Park, so it is quite a long day. The park opens at 6 and closes at 6, and we were there at 6 and left at 6 to make the most of it. And I can't tell you how amazing the experience was. It was quite funny, we were all packed into the safari vehicle, which is open air. There are no windows. They're the green Jeeps or Land Rovers that I'm sure that you've seen before. And as soon as we got in the gates, the sun was coming up, and the first animal that we saw, I think, was an impala. And everybody whipped out their cameras and, oh my God, it's an impala. And then we quickly realized that impalas are basically like the kangaroos, of South Africa. So there weren't too many more photos of impala taken. But it's funny how even throughout the day, you get so used to seeing elephants and baboons and different animals like that you almost take it for granted that you're seeing them, throughout the day as you're looking for, the big five and the bigger kind of animals that are harder to find. A little bit about the experience itself. So it wasn't a G Adventures vehicle that we were in. As I mentioned, it was an open air Land Rover, so there are no windows. When you're driving through, you're hearing the sounds of the bush, which is also just incredible to stop and listen to. We had a thunderstorm in the middle of our day there, and just hearing those claps of thunder and then hearing the birds react to that was just amazing. So you're driving around in a vehicle with a ranger, a Kruger National Park ranger, and he or she takes you through, what animals you're seeing, the different patterns, the different geography, because even within Kruger itself, there are different parts. You go through riverbeds, there are mountainous areas, a little bit more like grassland areas. So it does vary quite a lot when you're actually there. It's a huge space. So you're basically on the trek as soon as you go in, looking for the big five, essentially. There are different stops along the way. They are quite far between, so obviously you can't get out of the vehicle when you're in Kruger. The animals look like they're, quite far away and sometimes look a little bit sleepy, but I'm sure it would be quite a different situation if you actually got out of the safari vehicle. So you do need to wait to get to those designated stops along the way. The other thing with Kruger that differs from, say, a private game reserve such as Karongwe, which is where we headed next on our tour, is you have to stay on the path. You can't go off track. There are lots and lots of different roads that you can take. You can take a private vehicle if you wish, but to be honest, in my experience, if you're unfamiliar with Kruger National Park and you're wanting to make the most of your full day there, going on a guided tour with a ranger is just the best way to bulk learn in one day and make sure that you see the big five. The difference between somewhere like Kruger National Park, which is a national park, and a private game reserve is that in a private game reserve, it's a smaller area. There aren't quite as many animals for that reason, but because there are fewer people and you can go off track, you have more intimate experiences with the animals. So we had situations where, you know, elephants were coming right up to our open air vehicles, and it felt like an elephant trunk was just going to come out and touch you. It was just amazing. We came right up beside a male lion. He was right there beside the vehicle. Totally not fazed by us being there, just kind of wandered off into the jungle when he'd had enough. But all of our animal encounters there were just so close and really quite overwhelming. I think for some people, seeing the elephants and a huge family of elephants bathing together with their little babies, throwing mud on one another and flicking water and mud at our vehicle and one another was, you know, a really emotional experience. And you could look around and actually see tears streaming down people's faces, you know, just the joy of being in that moment. For me personally, it was when we came across 3 brother cheetahs who were contemplating having wildebeest for breakfast but decided not to, and we just followed them along the track for quite a while. And having been a big cat lover for my whole life and having dreamed of seeing cheetahs in the wild, it was just a dream come true. And like the others with the elephants, I just couldn't stop the tears streaming down my face, and it was just one of my life highlights. It was incredible. So one of the other things when you're on the private game reserves versus a national park is you can do morning and evening drives. You're not restricted to park hours. So when we were staying in Karongwe, we would get up really, really early in the morning when it was dark, and we'd go out in search of animals when they were at their most active, and similarly in the evenings. So you would maybe venture out about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, trek for a little while, and we did have a dedicated tracker as well as a ranger. So they were super knowledgeable. They would look for animal tracks, droppings, broken sticks, leaves trodden on to try and track where the animals were. And they are like absolutely incredible at what they do. I don't know how they find these animals looking at the information that they have, but they do. So you venture out in the afternoon, it would start getting dark. You'd stop, have a glass of champagne, have some snacks, and then continue on looking, you know, for animals from chameleons to leopards. We were lucky enough to see some rhino as it was hitting dusk. And just, you know, again, truly a magical experience, and arriving back at the lodge just in time for dinner. When I was on the safari with G, I was really, you know, thinking about what it would be like for a family to travel to South Africa and take their family on a safari, and what that would mean for young kids. And I think that there are, you know, a few considerations, particularly for a family who say wanted to go and do a full day safari in Kruger National Park. Probably some things that you don't really think about, you know, including, is your child old enough to follow instructions from a guide to not stand up in a vehicle or wave their hands, which can create quite catastrophic moments with animals getting frightened? Can they hold their bladder between stops, because it can be quite a while between sites? Could they last a full day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. without getting bored? Because sometimes, you know, there are moments when you're on safari that you're not seeing a lot, or you're looking for things. So I think that they're really important things to consider before embarking on a South Africa trip as a family, for example. But I think in terms of family travel and making it easier for families, G Adventures do have a range of of family tours, and also as part of their Nat Geo range, where they have itineraries and activities that are specifically designed for families. So when you jump on their website across their range of tours, which include other destinations like Vietnam and Thailand, they will have age guidelines on there, so which tend to be 6 or 7 plus depending on the destination. And the great thing about these itineraries is that the activities are designed for families in mind, whether it be the activity themselves or the structure of the day, so they'll allow for more free time. And they'll have guides that can speak specifically to a younger audience. So they're not just geared towards talking to an adult audience, to ensure that, the kids are learning and they're entertained throughout the day as well. I know G also really handpick their hotels that are more based on accommodations for families, so making sure that they're catering to a larger group. And I suppose, as a parent, what you really look for in a holiday or an adventure is that ability to have a holiday and adventure yourself without having to organise everything. The beauty of being on a G Adventures tour is that you have a guide, and I have to say my guide was just hands down the best guy. He was amazing. He was so funny, so knowledgeable, and so informative. They tell you what time to be somewhere, they tell you when to check out, they tell you where to have your bags, they help you have a room assigned. Everything that you do on that tour, you don't have to think about. So as a parent, when you're the one who's used to being, the one to organize everything, to have to do all of the thinking, the ability to not have to think is just a holiday in itself, I think. It's a mental holiday. But the other benefit for families as well is that everyone's entertained on these family trips. As I mentioned, there are activities that cater to the whole family, and you're also traveling with other families. So the average size of a G Adventures family trip is 10 to 12, so quite small groups. And generally you'll find families around, with kids around the same age. So while you're getting to enjoy the destination and learn, as well as the kids, they're also making friends. So they're entertained and they're happy. I really do think that, taking a family tour with G Adventures is just the best way to holiday if you're a parent or even an aunt or uncle who still wants that adventure experience, but without having to worry about how to structure it and how to put the day-to-day itineraries together. Thanks so much for watching and listening and allowing me to share my South Africa G Adventures experience with you all. I hope you found it informative, and for those who have been or those who are wanting to go, I'd love it if you could share your comments below and seriously consider taking your family or yourself on a G Adventures tour, and it's an experience that you just won't forget.